Welcome to a story of red hair, warm sweaters, loud dinners, and quiet bravery. Tonight, we're going to journey through the lives of the most beloved family in the wizarding world. The Weasleys. But not just Ron. Not just Ginny. We're going back before the Battle of Hogwarts. Before Harry ever set foot in the Burrow. Before the twins opened their joke shop or Molly raised her wand in fury. This is the story of a family with ancient roots and humble hearts. A family called blood traitors, who wore it like a badge of honor. A family that fed the chosen one and fought beside him and paid the price for doing what was right. Have you ever wondered what made Arthur and Molly fall in love during the First Wizarding War? Why Charlie never married? How Fred and George turned grief into laughter again? Or what happened to the next generation of Weasleys after Voldemort fell? Over the next few hours, we'll explore their full legacy. Spanning generations, wars, friendships, love, and the magic of ordinary courage. But before we begin, here's a question for you. Which Weasley child was born on the anniversary of the Battle of Hogwarts and shares their name with the French word for victory? Leave your guess in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories that let you fall asleep smiling, hit that like button and subscribe to join us for more magical bedtime journeys. So fluff your pillow, take a slow breath, and get ready to drift off into the warm, worn, wizarding world of the Weasley family. Let's begin. There is a house in Devon with a crooked chimney and a squeaky third stair. Its windows rattle in the wind, its gnome-infested garden is forever overrun, and the roof looks like it's held up by sheer stubbornness. But make no mistake, this house has seen war. On a night when the sky over Hogwarts turned black with smoke and the castle walls shook with the screams of the dying, the Burrow stood silent. Not because it had escaped the war, but because it had already paid its price. Inside, plates from dinner still sat unwashed. The old family clock ticked slowly, its hands all pointing to the mortal peril. And on the kitchen table, beneath a half-written letter and a cold cup of tea, lay a single red thread from a hand-knitted jumper. One that would never be finished. The war did not begin with Voldemort. Not for the Weasleys. It began decades earlier, when a young girl named Molly Pruitt kissed a boy named Arthur Weasley on the night the Dark Mark was seen over a neighboring town. It began when her brothers chose to fight and never came home. When Arthur hid half-blood allies inside ministry back hallways, even as his colleagues whispered, "Traitor." This is not just a story of one family's courage. It's the story of a bloodline that chose compassion over purity, poverty over privilege, and humanity over hate. It's about 7 children, each different, each fiercely loved. It's about the war before the war. And the home that outlived it. You already know how it ends. You've seen Ginny raise her wand against Bellatrix. You've heard Ron's voice crack when Fred fell. You've watched George laugh with a shadow beside him. But before all of that, there was a marriage. There was a fire. There was a promise that family would always come first. This is the story of that promise. The laughter. The blood. The battle behind the red door. The story of the Weasley family. From ancient bloodlines to broken plates. From war to love to legacy. Long before the world knew the name Ron Weasley, the family roots of this iconic clan stretched deep into the ancient soil of magical Britain. Proudly pureblood and fiercely principled, the Weasleys trace their ancestry back to the early days of Hogwarts, likely descending from the line of Godric Gryffindor himself, though, in true Weasley fashion, they never boasted of it. Their name, while absent from some corners of aristocratic wizarding society, has long been known in historical registries of the Sacred 28, a list of the most prominent pureblood families in Britain. Yet unlike many of their peers, the Weasleys never clung to the dogma of blood purity. In fact, they rejected it outright, earning them the enduring scorn and nickname of blood traitors from families such as the Malfoys or the Blacks. But to be a Weasley was never about pedigree. It was about principle. From generation to generation, the family chose integrity over prestige, love over legacy. While other noble houses built fortunes and enforced hierarchies, the Weasleys built homes, ones filled with laughter, children, modesty, and magic. That steadfast defiance of elitism would become the family's most enduring trait. One could argue that the soul of the family was embodied not in scrolls or bloodlines, but in a house, the Burrow. Situated just outside the quaint village of Ottery St. Catchpole in Devon, the Burrow was a chaotic tower of enchantment and charm. With slanted floors and mismatched additions seemingly stacked by accident, it was held together more by magic and love than architecture. Neighboring magical families like the Diggories, Fawcett's, and Lovegoods shared the landscape, forming a pocket of wizarding life nestled quietly within the English countryside. Yet none lived quite like the Weasleys, who, despite their lack of riches, offered something far rarer: unconditional welcome. Their home was always open, the hearth always warm, and the table always full, even if the plates were chipped. Through wars and ministry shifts, through triumphs and tragedies, the Weasley family never lost its sense of self. They were a family who knew what mattered most: not blood, not titles, not wealth, but the values that stitched them together. And in time, that would make all the difference. If the Weasley family tree had roots in ancient bloodlines, then its heart beat steadily within the walls of the Burrow. Nestled just beyond the Muggle village of Ottery St. Catchpole, the Burrow did not conform to any architectural logic known to wizard or Muggle. It was a towering patchwork of crooked chimneys, leaning floors, and spontaneous extensions, each room seemingly built to house the arrival of another child or another enchanted experiment. Held together more by loyalty and magical charms than mortar, the house was a living metaphor for the family that called it home: chaotic, enduring, and utterly full of life. The Burrow was originally a modest pigpen, at least, according to local law, but over the decades it had grown upward and outward, evolving into the whimsical structure it became by the late 20th century. Arthur and Molly Weasley, the modern patriarch and matriarch, raised all 7 of their children under its sloping roof. The family often joked that the house added a new room every time Molly found out she was pregnant, which wasn't far from the truth. While the Burrow lacked the grandeur of Malfoy Manor or the ancient heritage of the Black family's grim old place, it possessed something far more meaningful: warmth. The kind of warmth that came from cluttered kitchens filled with enchanted cookware and family chatter, from hand-knitted jumpers, mismatched furniture, and the scent of Molly's cooking drifting through the air. Magic buzzed softly in the walls, harmless household spells, self-sweeping brooms, a clock that tracked the location of every family member, and the occasional rogue ghoul in the attic. Outside, chickens pecked the earth freely, and a modest garden grew beneath the watchful eyes of gnomes who were always being tossed over the hedgerow. Beyond the garden was a makeshift Quidditch pitch where brothers fought for glory and sisters proved their strength. Laughter echoed louder than arguments, and despite their limited means, no visitor ever left hungry or unwelcomed. The Weasleys were not isolated in their corner of Devon. They shared the area with other notable wizarding families. The Diggories, with their quiet strength, the eccentric Lovegoods, whose home was as unpredictable as their beliefs, and the Fawcetts, known for their hospitality. These families, all magical in their own right, formed a hidden network of wizarding life in the English countryside, each distinct, yet loosely connected by a shared respect for magic, nature, and neighborly bonds. Ottery St. Catchpole itself was a Muggle village, blissfully unaware of the magic humming just beyond its hedgerows. The secrecy was maintained with precision, though the occasional magical mishap, exploding cauldrons, enchanted lawnmowers, or misfiring owls, had to be quickly covered up or memory charmed away. Arthur Weasley, in particular, found great joy in these Muggle magical intersections. His fascination with non-magical technology sometimes made the Burrow feel like a museum of enchanted plugs, radios, and battery-powered curiosities. In many ways, the Burrow was more than a home, it was a refuge. During times of conflict, it would serve as a stronghold for the Order of the Phoenix. During holidays, it became a gathering place for laughter, feasts, and the kind of familial chaos that made even the most hardened guests feel at ease. And for Harry Potter, who had grown up deprived of love and belonging, the Burrow would become a second home, his first real glimpse into what family could be. The Burrow wasn't perfect, and neither were the Weasleys. But within that creaking, overgrown house, magic and meaning found a harmony rarely seen in the wizarding world. There, amid the rickety staircases and hand-me-down furniture, a new chapter of wizarding history was being written. One prank, one meal, one midnight Quidditch match at a time. Long before they were the steadfast heads of one of the wizarding world's most beloved families, Arthur Weasley and Molly Pruitt were simply two Gryffindor students, bright-eyed, fiercely loyal, and drawn to each other like flint to flame. Arthur Weasley came from an old wizarding family, not wealthy, but proud. He attended Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in the 1960s, where he was sorted into Gryffindor House. From an early age, Arthur's curiosity set him apart. While many purebloods studied Muggle culture with disdain, Arthur was captivated. Electricity, rubber ducks, and telephones fascinated him far more than goblin rebellions or wand lore. Though often the subject of good-natured teasing, his passion was genuine and enduring. To him, Muggles weren't just intriguing, they were equals. Molly Pruitt, too, wore the red and gold of Gryffindor. She was sharp, strong-willed, and already displayed the fierce protectiveness that would later define her as a mother. Her magic was powerful, but it was her heart that truly stood out, steadfast, nurturing, and unshakably loyal. Molly had two older brothers, Fabian and Gideon Pruitt, both brilliant and courageous in their own right. The Pruitts were a respected pureblood family, known more for bravery than blood politics. Like the Weasleys, they never aligned with the ideology of supremacy that tainted much of pureblood society. Arthur and Molly's courtship began at Hogwarts, amid shared classes, common room fires, and weekend walks around the lake. By 7th year, their bond was unshakable. When Voldemort's first rise began to darken the skies of Britain in the 1970s, they knew the world was changing, and fast. They married young, as many did during that time. The First Wizarding War cast long shadows over every decision. There was a sense of urgency, of not waiting to build the life you wanted. The wedding was a modest affair, but filled with joy, friends, laughter, and the kind of magic that didn't need once to be real. In the early years, Arthur and Molly made their home in the Burrow. It was humble, especially compared to the more opulent wizarding homes, but filled quickly with life. Arthur began working at the Ministry of Magic in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, specifically the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office. It was a niche role, underfunded and often overlooked, but Arthur loved it. His excitement for confiscating bewitched toasters and radios was unmatched. Promotions were rare, and pay was modest, but he never complained. Arthur believed in doing what was right, not what was impressive. Molly, meanwhile, poured herself into her growing family. She bore child after child with love and purpose, raising them not just to be magical, but to be kind. She kept the household running with both magic and iron will, her wand and wooden spoon equally effective tools of discipline. Her famous jumpers, hand-knitted and emblazoned with initials, became symbols of her warmth and devotion. But life wasn't untouched by tragedy. During Voldemort's first rise to power, the Pruitt family paid a heavy price. Molly's beloved brothers, Fabian and Gideon, joined the original Order of the Phoenix. Known for their skill and bravery, they fought valiantly against Death Eaters, and died together, outnumbered but not outmatched in courage. It was believed that Bellatrix Lestrange and her fellow fanatics were responsible. Molly rarely spoke of their deaths. The pain carved itself deep, visible only in the way she fretted over her children's safety or the way her voice trembled when the war was mentioned. She mourned in private, but she loved in full. Her grief made her fiercer, not harder. Arthur, for his part, provided steady calm. His gentleness balanced Molly's fire. Where she worried, he reassured. Where she protected, he encouraged. Together, they created a home that stood against the storms of war, poverty, and prejudice, a home that would come to shelter not just their children, but Harry Potter himself, and eventually, the hope of the wizarding world. Their marriage was never about appearances. It was about resilience, mutual respect, and a belief in something greater than themselves. In a world threatened by darkness, Arthur and Molly built light, and filled it with life. In the quiet stillness between war and family, 1,000 small moments went unnoticed by the rest of the wizarding world. The official records mention Molly and Arthur Weasley only in passing during the First Wizarding War, one as a young ministry employee, the other as a grieving sister and rising matriarch. But their true story lives in the spaces between. A box beneath Molly's bed, bound in soft green ribbon and dusted with age, held a collection of letters never sent. Some were addressed to her brothers, Fabian and Gideon, written in trembling ink during sleepless nights with newborn Bill resting on her shoulder. Others were never addressed at all, rambling reflections written as Voldemort's shadow grew and the world outside the burrow turned cold with fear. Fabian, Gideon, please be careful. I know you think I worry too much, but the prophet said there were attacks in Kent again, and I haven't heard from either of you in 3 days. Arthur says you're likely on assignment, but I can't sleep. Every creak of the floorboard makes me think it's Dumbledore at the door. I'm not ready to say goodbye. You're not allowed to go where I can't follow. Not yet. Arthur had his own way of coping. On nights when the ministry's corridors echoed with rumors and tension, he returned to the burrow late, carrying pieces of Muggle junk like other men brought flowers. A broken toaster. A rubber duck. A cassette player with its insides humming faintly with confused enchantment. These weren't just hobbies, they were distractions, hopeful puzzles to keep him from drowning in a world he couldn't fix. They never officially joined the Order, not during the First War. Molly had babies in her arms and brothers already fighting. Arthur, though brave, had a family to shield and a role at the ministry that allowed him to pass along what he could quietly. They helped how they could, sheltering, feeding, listening. The burrow became an unofficial waypoint. A candle always lit in the window for anyone who needed it. And when Fabian and Gideon died, together, outnumbered but unbroken, it was Molly who screamed loudest in the silence, and Arthur who held her for hours, saying nothing. Because there was nothing to say. They buried her brothers with white lilies and red chrysanthemums, in a field where no spell could reach. The Daily Prophet offered no tribute. The ministry offered no medals. But Dumbledore came in person, and that was enough. That summer, Molly began knitting a sweater with 2 capital FS on the front, even though there was no one left to wear it. She never finished it. She packed it away instead, tucked into the same box beneath the bed. Years later, when the war returned and the Order rose again, Arthur and Molly would not stand aside. But in these quiet years, between the echoes of the First War and the drumbeat of the Second, they lived, loved, and tried to make a world where their children would never need to write letters they couldn't send. By the time the Second War began to rise, Arthur and Molly Weasley had already endured one. During the First Wizarding War, their involvement had been quiet, but crucial. Arthur, though never officially a member of the original Order of the Phoenix, passed along valuable intelligence from inside the ministry. Molly, while raising a growing household, had offered shelter, supplies, and solace to those who came through their door. They were not on the front lines like Fabian and Gideon Pruitt, but they were resistance, living, breathing, defiant resistance. That war ended, at least on the surface, in 1981 with the fall of Lord Voldemort at the hands of an infant. For a time, the wizarding world exhaled. Peace returned, if uneasily. The Weasleys, like many families, hoped they had seen the last of such darkness. But grief lingered in Molly's eyes whenever the Pruitt name was mentioned. The price of that first war had been steep. Her brothers had died heroes, cut down by Death Eaters in a battle so brutal that even Alastair Moody spoke of it with reverence. The Lestranges were widely believed to have led the attack. No body was ever returned. Just broken wands, shattered hope, and a silence too wide to fill. Molly never forgave the Lestranges. Nor did she forgive the ministry's silence. She channeled her rage into love, into her children, her cooking, her fierce maternal instinct. Her magic, once graceful, grew sharper in the years that followed. No one who knew her underestimated her again. Arthur, ever steady, remained in the ministry's department for the misuse of Muggle artifacts. Promotions passed him by, likely because of his outspoken views and his fascination with Muggle technology, interests that did not sit well with more traditionalist purebloods. But he remained loyal to the truth, to fairness, and to family. In a world quietly rebuilding itself, Arthur was a stabilizing presence. As their 7 children grew, so did the storm clouds over Britain. Strange disappearances. Murmurs of you-know-who's return. The Ministry dismissed the rumors, but the Weasleys had seen too much to believe in comfort. When Harry Potter arrived in their lives, the boy who had survived the Dark Lord's fall, it was Molly who treated him like a son from the first. Arthur who welcomed him as if he'd always belonged. Neither knew yet how deeply they would be drawn into the coming war, or how central Harry would become to their family and the fate of the wizarding world. When Voldemort returned, truly returned, after the Tri-Wizard Tournament in 1995, the Order of the Phoenix was reborn. This time, Arthur and Molly did not stand on the sidelines. They joined the second incarnation of the Order without hesitation. Arthur offered his ministry knowledge, his connections, his insight. Molly a fear. Armel headquarters. Later, number 12 Grimmauld Place would be the Order's official home, but the Burrow remained a place of healing and planning, a symbol of the world worth fighting for. Molly and Arthur's children, now coming of age, also joined the cause. One by one, they stepped into the fight their parents had long hoped they could avoid. Bill, working abroad, passed along intelligence. Charlie kept close watch over Eastern European magical activity. Percy, tragically, sided with the Ministry, driven by ambition and pride, severing ties with the family for years. The twins, Fred and George, used their shop as both a cover and a communication point. Ron, Ginny, and eventually even young Harry and Hermione formed Dumbledore's army, training in secret at Hogwarts under Umbridge's nose. Before we continue, if you are still awake and love these videos, hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the summer. In 1995, Arthur paid a heavy price for his allegiance. While guarding the Department of Mysteries as part of the Order's surveillance effort, he was attacked by Lord Voldemort's snake, Nagini. The venomous bite nearly killed him. He was saved only because Harry, through his psychic connection with Voldemort, witnessed the attack in real time. Arthur was rushed to St. Mungo's, where he survived, but the wound left more than just a scar. It was a warning, the war had truly begun. Through it all, Molly's strength never wavered. She worried, yes, ferociously, but she did not falter. She bore the role of Order member, mother, and general all at once. Her greatest fear was not dying, it was burying another child. And yet, as the darkness crept closer, as Hogwarts became a battleground and the Ministry fell into Voldemort's grasp, the Weasleys stood unshaken. They had already lost brothers, years, and peace, but they would not lose their family, not without a fight. William Arthur Weasley, born in 1970, arrived into a world still reeling from the aftermath of war. As the first child of Arthur and Molly Weasley, Bill bore both the hopes of recovery and the weight of legacy. From the very beginning, he showed signs of being something exceptional, not only in magical talent, but in character. Bill's childhood at the Burrow was marked by the noise and joy of a growing family. As the eldest of what would become 7 siblings, he quickly became a quiet leader among the chaos. He was patient with his younger brothers, protective of his sister Ginny before she could even walk, and already a role model by the time he entered Hogwarts. Sorted into Gryffindor house like generations before him, Bill excelled in both academics and leadership. He wasn't loud about his achievements, he didn't need to be. His confidence was quiet, earned rather than assumed. By his 7th year, he had been appointed head boy, a distinction that carried more weight than glory. It was a sign not just of magical proficiency, but of integrity and responsibility, 2 qualities that would define his life. After Hogwarts, Bill chose a path that surprised some. He became a curse-breaker for Gringotts Wizarding Bank. It was a dangerous, demanding job, involving travel to ancient tombs, cursed ruins, and magically protected vaults in far-flung regions of the world. His posting in Egypt took him far from home, but not out of touch. Bill wrote often to his parents, sent trinkets and stories to his younger siblings, and returned for holidays when he could. His long hair, dragonhide boots, and single-fang earring were the source of amusement to some, but to the Weasleys, they were emblems of his independence and success. Despite working for the goblin-run Gringotts, Bill never adopted their cold detachment. He remained warm, principled, and quietly rebellious, much like his parents. His job gave him a broad view of the world and deep respect for ancient magic, but when the storm clouds of Voldemort's return began to gather once more, Bill didn't hesitate to come home. During the Second Wizarding War, Bill rejoined his family and aligned fully with the Order of the Phoenix. His role expanded from treasure hunter to protector. He helped secure safe houses, provided international intelligence, and stood guard at crucial moments. His knowledge of ancient magic and defensive spells became an asset to the Resistance. It was during this time that he met Fleur Delica, the French Triwizard champion who had stayed on in Britain to improve her English and work at Gringotts. What began as a professional acquaintance soon developed into a romance, one that raised eyebrows in some corners of the wizarding world. Fleur was part Veela, elegant, proud, and, to many, intimidating. But Bill saw beyond her beauty and confidence. He saw her courage, her loyalty, and her love. Molly, at first, had her reservations, but in time Fleur proved herself in the most difficult of circumstances. That trial came during the Battle of the Astronomy Tower in 1997. Bill, fighting alongside other members of the Order, was attacked by Fenrir Greyback, a savage werewolf aligned with Voldemort. Though Greyback was not transformed at the time, the wounds he inflicted were brutal, both magical and physical. Bill was left scarred, his face torn. Many feared he would be changed, twisted physically or magically, but Fleur's reaction silenced them all. "I am good-looking enough for both of us," she said defiantly at his bedside, her voice fierce with love. That moment cemented Fleur not only as Bill's partner but as a true member of the Weasley family. They married during the summer of 1997 at the Burrow. The ceremony, beautiful and brave, took place just before Voldemort's rise became public and the Ministry fell. The wedding was interrupted by Death Eater attacks, but even amidst chaos, the bond between Bill and Fleur held firm. After the war, Bill and Fleur settled at Shell Cottage, a small, wind-battered house by the sea, just outside Tinworth. It became both a sanctuary and a symbol of survival. During the final months of the war, they offered refuge to escapees from Malfoy Manor, including Griphook the Goblin, Luna Lovegood, and the tortured Ollivander. Shell Cottage stood as a quiet defiance to tyranny. In the years that followed, Bill and Fleur had 3 children, Victoire, Dominique, and Louis. Their family blended English and French magical traditions, and the children grew up between 2 cultures, strong, magical, and kind. Bill continued his work with Gringotts, but always kept one eye on the world, ever watchful for injustice, ever ready to defend the peace his family had fought so hard to win. Bill Weasley was many things: a curse breaker, a son, a brother, a husband, a father. But above all, he was a trailblazer, the first to step forward, the first to lead, and the first to remind the world that a Weasley's strength is quiet, but unshakable. If Bill was the trailblazer, then Charles Weasley, Charlie to everyone who knew him, was the firebrand. Born in 1972, Charlie was the second son of Arthur and Molly Weasley, and from the very beginning, he was a force of nature. Where Bill was composed and bookish, Charlie was physical, fearless, and endlessly drawn to the wild. He had a streak of mischief that rivaled the twins, but unlike Fred and George, Charlie's pranks often took the form of daring feats, climbing to the roof of the burrow on a broomstick before he could ride one properly, sneaking into the paddock to tame gnomes barehanded, or catching garden snakes and pretending they spoke Parseltongue. From his first year at Hogwarts, Charlie was a Gryffindor through and through. He was well-liked, loyal, and magnetic, never loud, but always admired. He excelled in care of magical creatures, defense against the dark arts, and especially flying. By 3rd year, he was already being whispered about as one of the best Quidditch players Hogwarts had ever seen. Charlie became captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team in his 5th year, leading with courage and an unshakable sense of camaraderie. Even Oliver Wood, who later captained the team under Harry Potter, often referenced Charlie's skill and leadership with reverence. There were rumors he could have gone professional, many believed he would, but Charlie had another passion that pulled stronger than any broomstick: dragons. While most children read about Hungarian horntails or Chinese fireballs with awe, Charlie wanted to study them. Touch them. Train them. Understand them. After Hogwarts, he pursued that dream with relentless determination, taking a post with a dragon sanctuary in Romania. There, among snow-covered peaks and smoking mountainsides, Charlie found his calling. He thrived in the harsh, unpredictable world of dragon conservation. His work was dangerous, requiring quick reflexes, deep magical understanding, and nerves of steel. But Charlie never craved attention or glory. He didn't write articles or give lectures. He simply did the work, wrapping burns, casting binding charms, calming rampaging ridgebacks, and wrote long letters home filled with dry humor, exotic details, and the occasional scorched parchment. Back in Britain, Charlie remained deeply connected to his family. He returned for holidays when he could, often bringing small enchanted trinkets or tales that enthralled his younger siblings. Ginny, in particular, idolized him. He never saw himself as a hero, but in the eyes of his family, especially the younger Weasleys, he was something close to one. During the Second Wizarding War, Charlie's work in Romania kept him somewhat outside the direct conflict at first. But as the situation in Britain deteriorated, he stepped in, quietly and without question. He helped transport magical creatures for the Order of the Phoenix, arranged safe passage across borders, and kept a vigilant eye on Eastern European magical activity that might have signaled a broader rise in dark forces. He returned to Britain for the Battle of Hogwarts, arriving just in time to fight alongside his family in defense of the school. It was one of the few moments in his life where his two worlds, family and fire, truly collided. He fought bravely, standing shoulder to shoulder with siblings, students, and fellow warriors in what would become the defining conflict of a generation. Unlike many of his brothers, Charlie never married. His life was devoted to his work and his freedom. He was content among dragons, in the wilderness, under open skies. That choice raised eyebrows among some, particularly Molly, who had long hoped to see him settle down. But Charlie lived according to his own compass. His path didn't lead to a house in Ottery St. Catchpole, but to cliffsides and dragon pens and long nights beneath stars far from the British Isles. And yet, he was always a Weasley. He returned for births, funerals, and weddings. He sent birthday owls and care packages and roared with laughter at every family meal. His love ran quiet but deep, like fire beneath stone. He didn't need roots to be rooted. He belonged to the family not through proximity, but through loyalty. Charlie Weasley was the embodiment of freedom, bold, brave, and unbound. While others shaped the future of the wizarding world with laws and legacy, Charlie shaped it with respect for nature, magical responsibility, and the silent bravery of those who protect what others fear. Percy Ignatius Weasley was born in 1976, the third son of Arthur and Molly, and the first to break the unspoken rhythm of the Weasley family dynamic. Where Bill led with quiet confidence and Charlie blazed his own trail, Percy charted a more rigid course. He was intelligent, brilliant, even, but with a sharpness that sometimes cut. From an early age, Percy valued rules, order, and achievement. He was the child who polished his prefect badge before his first day at Hogwarts, who color-coded his books, and who corrected his siblings' pronunciation of spells whether or not they asked. To many, Percy was the embodiment of ambition. At Hogwarts, he was sorted into Gryffindor, though some whispered he might have fit in Slytherin. But Percy's courage was real, it just took the form of steadfast conviction rather than battlefield valor. He rose quickly through the ranks of student leadership, prefect, then head boy, earning top marks in nearly every subject and glowing recommendations from his professors. His dream was to rise in the Ministry of Magic. Not for fame or riches, but because he believed in the system. Percy had an almost religious faith in structure, in merit, in rules. To him, the ministry represented progress and order. He revered Bartemius Crouch Sr., his supervisor during a school internship, and aspired to climb the same ladder of public service and dignity. But it was this faith that would tear him from his family. When Lord Voldemort returned, and the ministry refused to acknowledge it, the wizarding world fractured. Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix declared the Dark Lord's return, while the ministry discredited Harry Potter and branded Dumbledore a traitor. The Weasleys, especially Arthur and Molly, stood firmly with Harry, Dumbledore, and the truth. Percy, however, did not. Seeing the Order as fringe and Dumbledore as misguided, Percy sided with the ministry. In doing so, he accepted a rapid promotion to junior assistant to the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge at the time. Arthur accused the ministry of using Percy as a pawn, and when Percy refused to see it, a bitter confrontation followed. Percy left the Burrow, severed contact with his family, and moved to London. For years, the rift remained. Percy wrote no letters, sent no gifts, and avoided even Fred and George's jokes when they mocked his stern demeanor in public. Molly, heartbroken, continued to set a place for him at the Christmas table. Arthur spoke of him only when necessary. His siblings, particularly Ron and Ginny, felt betrayed. Even as Voldemort's power grew, Percy held his course, believing he was doing what was right. But truth has a way of catching up. When the ministry fell and Voldemort took control, Percy's belief in the system collapsed. The corruption, fear, and cruelty he had ignored became undeniable. And so, quietly, Percy began to reconsider. He stayed in the shadows, watching, waiting. Then, in the final hours of the war, he came home. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Percy returned to fight alongside his family. He sought out Fred first, begging forgiveness mid-duel with a joke that made them both laugh, just before the world came crashing down. Moments later, Fred was killed by an explosion, his final moments shared with the brother who had once left him behind. The grief was overwhelming. Percy, inconsolable, refused to leave Fred's side until the end. In that moment, he was no longer the estranged son or the ambitious politician. He was just a brother, broken and too late. After the war, Percy reconciled with his family. It was not instantaneous, but it was real. He returned to the ministry, but with clearer eyes and a softened heart. He worked to repair what had been damaged, not just in the world, but within himself. He was never quite the same, and perhaps he shouldn't have been. Ambition had taken him far, but it was love, and the loss of it, that brought him back. Percy Weasley remains a reminder that not all wars are fought on battlefields. Some are fought within, between pride and humility, certainty and truth. And in choosing to come home, Percy showed the same courage that had always run through the Weasley name. No story of the Weasley family can be told without laughter, and no laughter rang louder than that of Fred and George. Born on April 1, 1978, April Fool's Day, as fate would have it, Fred and George Weasley entered the world as a matched set of troublemakers, twins whose bond was deeper than blood and whose humor masked sharp minds and even sharper instincts. Even as children, the twins were a force of nature at the Burrow. Where one went, the other followed. They spoke in unison, finished each other's sentences, and rarely answered to individual names unless they were in trouble. Their antics became legend within the household. Enchanted fireworks at dinner, singing gnomes in Molly's laundry, and more than one accidental explosion in the broom shed. At Hogwarts, Fred and George were sorted, naturally, into Gryffindor. They quickly earned reputations as pranksters, rule-breakers, and occasional thorns in the side of their professors, especially Severus Snape. Yet beneath the chaos lay brilliance. They were exceptionally gifted at charms, spell invention, and magical engineering, skills they would eventually turn into a revolutionary business. Though they rarely showed interest in academic accolades, their time at Hogwarts was far from wasted. They co-opted corridors, bewitched suits of armor, and built a legacy in every secret passage. Their greatest invention during this time, however, wasn't a spell or a joke product, it was Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, a dream they nurtured in sketches and prototypes while pretending to do homework. But when the Second Wizarding War began to stir, the twins didn't just stand back and laugh, they took a stand. Their turning point came in 1995 during Dolores Umbridge's cruel regime at Hogwarts. In a moment of inspired defiance, Fred and George staged a final fireworks rebellion, setting off a dazzling, explosive display of magical chaos that brought the school to a halt. Their dramatic broomstick escape from the castle, laughing all the while, became instant legend, a symbol of joyful resistance in a time of growing fear. With their earnings from Harry Potter's Tri-Wizard winnings, a gift Harry insisted upon, they opened Weasley's Wizard Wheezes in Diagon Alley. What began as a joke shop soon became a sanctuary. Their products, skiving snack boxes, extendable ears, shield hats, became tools of rebellion. Students, order members, and even ministry workers used their inventions to undermine Death Eater control. Their shop thrived, even as war closed in around them. Then came the final battle. Fred and George both returned to Hogwarts for the Battle of Hogwarts in 1998. Together, they fought bravely to defend the castle and the future it represented. But in the chaos of the battle, just after a moment of laughter shared with Percy, who had finally returned, Fred was killed in an explosion. It was as sudden as it was devastating. The loss shattered the family. Molly collapsed in grief. George went silent. The boy who had never lived a moment without his twin now faced a world that was permanently, painfully quieter. In the years that followed, George bore his grief in silence. He returned to the shop, running it alone, though not truly alone. He kept Fred's name on the signage. He carried his laugh in the walls. Eventually, Ron joined him as a business partner, helping him shoulder the weight of what had been lost. George married Angelina Johnson, a fellow Gryffindor and former Quidditch teammate. They had 2 children, one of whom, fittingly, they named Fred. Fred and George's legacy was not just in the joke products or the enchanted fireworks. It was in the joy they brought, the courage they inspired, and the belief that laughter, even in the darkest of times, is a form of resistance. Fred died with a smile on his face, and George carried that smile with him for the rest of his life. Together, they were the heart of the Weasley spirit, fearless, funny, and unshakably loyal. Born in 1980, Ronald Bilious Weasley was the 6th child, and 4th son, of Arthur and Molly Weasley. Growing up at the Burrow meant sharing everything: bedrooms, birthdays, hand-me-down robes, and more than a few second-hand wands. It was Ron, not the eldest, not the brightest, not the most daring, who stood at the center of it all. From the beginning, Ron struggled with being overlooked. He followed in the footsteps of 5 accomplished older brothers: Bill the head boy, Charlie the Quidditch star, Percy the prefect, Fred and George the inventors and mischief makers, and was soon joined by Ginny, the only daughter and a whirlwind in her own right. Ron was, in his own mind, ordinary. But that view would soon be shattered. Ron's life changed the moment he boarded the Hogwarts Express in 1991 and sat across from a small, bespectacled boy with a lightning-shaped scar. Harry Potter. From that moment on, Ron's story became inextricably linked with legend. At Hogwarts, Ron was sorted into Gryffindor like the rest of his family. He quickly proved his worth, not through dazzling grades or dueling finesse, but through loyalty, courage, and a deep, unshakable moral compass. He stood by Harry in countless trials. Fighting a troll in their first year, navigating a giant chessboard, a moment that demonstrated both bravery and sacrifice, and facing down the darkest magic the school had seen in generations. Ron didn't crave the spotlight. In fact, he often wrestled with feelings of inadequacy toward Harry, Hermione, his brothers. But time and again, he showed that bravery isn't loud. It's standing by your friends when no one else will. It's returning to the fight even when fear tells you to run. His friendship with Hermione Granger began with teasing and bickering, but slowly blossomed into one of the deepest bonds in the series. Hermione challenged Ron to be more thoughtful, more curious, more courageous. He, in turn, offered her loyalty, warmth, and a grounding sense of home she'd never known. Their romance bloomed quietly, often in moments of crisis rather than calm, but it was real, and it lasted. Ron's role in the Second Wizarding War was enormous, if often underplayed. He was a founding member of Dumbledore's army, fought in multiple battles, and stood beside Harry and Hermione through their quest to destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes, a journey that cost them comfort, safety, and nearly their lives. His departure from the trio in the winter of 1997, driven by stress, fear, and the Locket's curse, was one of his lowest moments. But his return, guided by love and repentance, marked one of his greatest. He saved Harry's life, destroyed a Horcrux, and emerged stronger. At the Battle of Hogwarts, Ron fought not just for victory, but for family. He witnessed Fred's death, defended the school, and helped bring about the end of the Second Wizarding War. In the ashes of battle, he found not just survival, but purpose. After the war, Ron joined George at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, helping rebuild the business and support his grieving brother. Eventually, he also worked at the Ministry of Magic in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, using his experience to help reshape a more just wizarding society. Ron married Hermione, and together they had 2 children, Rose and Hugo. Their family became a symbol of post-war unity, Gryffindor and Ravenclaw, pureblood and Muggleborn, tradition and reform. Ron remained Ron, funny, loyal, occasionally clumsy, but always brave. More than any of his siblings, Ron Weasley embodied the heart of the Weasley name. He was the friend who never abandoned you, the brother who showed up when it mattered, the hero who didn't need to be chosen to make a difference. He was proof that the strongest kind of magic isn't always cast with a wand, it's loyalty, love, and the courage to keep going even when you doubt your place in the story. Ginevra Molly Weasley, born in 1981, was the last child of Arthur and Molly Weasley, and the only daughter in a sea of brothers. From the moment she could walk, Ginny learned to hold her own in a household filled with loud voices, flying bludgers, and boisterous laughter. But Ginny didn't just survive it, she thrived. There was never any doubt, she was a Weasley through and through. Raised at the Burrow among 6 older brothers, Ginny developed a sharp wit, an independent spirit, and an unshakable sense of self. She chased after brooms before she could properly ride them, demanded to play Quidditch with her brothers despite their teasing, and secretly practiced spells long before attending Hogwarts. Her magical talent bloomed early, and her fierce determination was matched only by her heart. Even as a child, Ginny idolized Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the hero of bedtime stories. She never imagined that she'd one day stand beside him in battle, or that she would be the one to help him find peace. Ginny began her Hogwarts journey in 1992, sorted into Gryffindor like her family. Her first year was marked by darkness, the reopening of the Chamber of Secrets and her own possession by Tom Riddle's diary. Manipulated through fear and isolation, Ginny nearly lost her life, but her survival marked a turning point. She emerged from the experience quieter but stronger. More guarded, but braver. From then on, Ginny was no one-side character. She grew into one of the most talented witches of her generation. Confident, skilled in both hexes and defensive magic, she became a standout member of Dumbledore's army, earning the respect of peers and professors alike. Her Bat Bogey hex was feared, her leadership was natural, and her courage in battle was unwavering. On the Quidditch pitch, she was a force. First joining the Gryffindor team as a seeker in Harry's absence, she later became a star chaser, fast, fierce, and fiery. Her athleticism and competitive drive gave her a reputation that extended far beyond Hogwarts walls. Ginny's relationship with Harry evolved slowly, built not on childhood admiration but on shared hardship, mutual respect, and a deep emotional bond forged in war. When they finally came together in her 6th year, it was with the kind of quiet inevitability that only true understanding can bring. Though they separated during the final phase of the war, Harry to hunt Horcruxes, Ginny to continue resisting at Hogwarts, their love endured. Ginny's bravery during the Second Wizarding War was among the most impressive in the series. When Hogwarts fell under the control of the Carrows and Snape, she remained a central figure in the resistance. Alongside Neville Longbottom and Luna Lovegood, she revived Dumbledore's army, sabotaged the regime, and kept hope alive for the younger students trapped under tyranny. She fought in the Battle of Hogwarts with her entire family, refusing to stay behind despite her mother's pleas. She battled Death Eaters, defended the school, and stood witness to the final fall of Voldemort. After the war, Ginny's story didn't end in the shadow of others, it took flight. She joined the Holyhead Harpies, one of the most prestigious all-female Quidditch teams in the world. Her professional career was marked by skill and fearlessness, earning her renown in her own right, not as Harry Potter's wife, but as Ginny Weasley, sportswoman and star. Eventually, Ginny transitioned from playing to writing, becoming the lead Quidditch correspondent for the Daily Prophet. Her voice, sharp, insightful, and passionate, brought the wizarding world's favorite sport to life for a new generation. She married Harry, and together they had 3 children, James Sirius, Albus Severus, and Lily Luna. Their family, a blend of Weasley warmth and Potter legacy, became one of the most admired in post-war Britain. But Ginny never lost her edge. She remained fiery, direct, and unwilling to let anyone define her by her family, her husband, or her past. She was her own person, a warrior, a writer, a mother, a leader. In Ginny Weasley burned the fiercest flame of the family, proof that strength comes in all forms, and that the quietest child may one day roar the loudest. As the Second Wizarding War descended on Britain, the Weasley family, long champions of justice, compassion, and equality, stood not only on the right side of history, but at its very heart. There was no question of where their loyalties lay. From the moment Lord Voldemort returned to full power, Arthur and Molly Weasley, along with their children, aligned themselves with the Order of the Phoenix. They did not seek safety. They did not wait for ministry permission. They acted, quietly at first, sheltering allies, spreading truth, and then openly, as battle lines were drawn. Each member of the family, in their own way, became a soldier in the rising war. Arthur Weasley worked from within the Ministry of Magic, passing intelligence to the Order, attending secret meetings, and maintaining his post even as the ministry was infiltrated by Death Eater sympathizers. His refusal to toe the party line placed him under scrutiny, and he came perilously close to death in 1995 when he was attacked by Nagini while guarding the Department of Mysteries. His survival, thanks to Harry's vision and a swift response from the Order, only steeled the family's resolve. Molly Weasley's contributions were less visible but no less vital. The Burrow became a sanctuary for allies, a place of warmth in a world growing colder. She fed the resistance, comforted the wounded, and maintained morale as only a mother could. But beneath the kindness was a fierce determination. Molly, who had already lost her brothers to the First War, was determined not to lose her children to the Second. The Weasley children each played their part. Scattered across continents, castles, and battlefields, yet united in purpose. Bill returned from Egypt to join the Order directly, helping with security, reconnaissance, and magical defenses. He and Fleur hosted fugitives at Shell Cottage after the fall of the Ministry, sheltering Griphook, Luna Lovegood, Ollivander, and others as the final battles drew near. Charlie coordinated resistance efforts from Romania, using his knowledge of magical creatures and his network of international contacts to track threats and ferry information back to Dumbledore. Percy remained estranged from the family for much of the war, his faith in the Ministry blinding him to the truth. His absence was a wound that deepened with time, especially for Molly. Yet even this fracture could not sever the core of what made the Weasleys strong. Fred and George, entrepreneurs turned revolutionaries, transformed Weasley's Wizard Wheezes into a hub of resistance. Their inventions became weapons of hope. Shield hats, Peruvian instant darkness powder, decoy detonators, tools born of humor, now repurposed for survival. They passed information, equipped allies, and reminded a frightened public that defiance could still carry a smile. Ron, Ginny, and the extended trio, Harry and Hermione, became the soul of the youth-led resistance. Ron traveled the countryside with Harry and Hermione, hunting Horcruxes and enduring bitter months on the run, while Ginny, left behind at Hogwarts, continued the fight within its walls. She led a reformed Dumbledore's army, orchestrated sabotage missions, and gave students the courage to resist the Carrow's brutality. And then, there was the turning point. In 1998, when Harry returned to Hogwarts in search of the final Horcrux, the Weasleys followed. One by one, they arrived, Bill and Fleur, Charlie, Percy, who returned at last to make amends, and the rest. Together, they joined the final stand against Voldemort in the Battle of Hogwarts. They fought with everything they had. It was in these hallowed halls that the family paid its greatest price. During the chaos of the battle, as explosions tore through stone and curses rained from the towers, Fred Weasley was killed. He died mid-laugh, fighting beside Percy, reconciled at last. The joy that had lit the darkest hours of the war was silenced in an instant. The shock reverberated through the family like a curse of its own. Percy, who had only just returned, held Fred's body in anguish. George, who had never been without his twin, stood shattered. Molly, inconsolable, wept as though her soul had been torn in half. But even then, the Weasleys did not retreat. Molly, in a moment of unforgettable fury, confronted Bellatrix Lestrange during the final moments of the battle. The Death Eater, responsible for the deaths of countless innocents, and perhaps the one who had killed Molly's brothers decades earlier, was dueling Ginny when Molly stepped in. "Not my daughter, you bitch!" she roared, her voice echoing through the great hall. The duel ended with Bellatrix's death, a victory not just for Molly, but for every mother, every fighter, every life lost to Voldemort's cause. By sunrise, the war was over. Voldemort was dead. The light had returned. But the Weasleys stood one fewer. In the face of devastation, they chose to rebuild, not with bitterness, but with love. They had given everything, their home, their strength, their son. But they had never lost each other, not truly. Not even in death. The war did not break the Weasleys. It revealed them. They were never the richest, never the most powerful, never the most polished. But when the world needed heroes, real, ordinary, extraordinary heroes, it was the Weasleys who answered. The Second Wizarding War had not just engulfed the wizarding world, it had carved itself into the soul of the Weasley family. From the halls of Hogwarts to the hills of Romania, the Burrow's children had scattered across a fractured Britain, each bearing the banner of resistance in their own way. They weren't generals or chosen ones. They weren't rich, or powerful, or draped in titles. They were brothers, a sister, sons, and a daughter. They were a mother who would hex Death Eaters to ash if it meant protecting her children. A father who still believed, even in the darkest of times, in the worth of ordinary things. And still, they had endured. Together, they had seen the tides of battle shift. They had patched each other's wounds in candlelit safe houses. They had shouted across battlefield ruins and shared whispered jokes before duels. They had watched friends fall, institutions crumble, and the face of evil rise again. Yet in every act of defiance, there was a familiar red-headed figure, or two, or 10. Bill casting protective enchantments over safe houses. Charlie smuggling creatures and coded messages across Europe. Percy returning, breathless and remorseful, at the 11th hour. Ginny marching into the final battle with her chin lifted and wand drawn. Ron, blooded and exhausted, guarding Harry's back to the last second. And Fred and George, twin pillars of laughter in a collapsing world, arming the resistance with decoys and detonators, their wands always moving, their jokes never faltering. But war doesn't ask for permission before it takes. And even the brightest light can flicker under shadow. As dawn approached over the battlefield, with spells still flying and the walls of Hogwarts crumbling around them, a moment came that would silence even the echo of laughter. A moment so sharp, so cruel, it would leave a scar deeper than any wound magic could heal. The Weasleys had survived a war. But they were about to lose a piece of themselves. What came next was not just tragedy. It was heartbreak. It was the fracture of something sacred. It was the sound of one twin laughing alone. It happened in an instant. One moment, Fred Weasley was laughing, sharing a joke with Percy, shoulder to shoulder in the battle's chaos, reconciled at last. The next, the corridor exploded. A wall collapsed. And the laughter stopped. Fred Weasley, the boy born of light and mischief, the twin who had turned fear into fireworks, fell where he stood, killed by an unknown curse, mid-laugh, in the defense of Hogwarts. There were no goodbyes. No final words. Just shock, then screams, and a silence that seemed to spread like a spell of its own. The news broke the family like nothing else had. Percy was the first to reach him, dropping to his knees beside his brother's body, shaking with disbelief. For so long he had stood apart, severed by pride. And now, having just rejoined the fold, he found himself cradling the sibling he would never again argue with, never tease, never thank. Molly's scream, raw, primal, shattering, echoed through the halls. Arthur stood frozen, his face hollowed by grief. Bill and Charlie tried to pull Percy away. Ron sank against the stone, numb. Ginny turned away, her wand trembling. George didn't move at all. No one felt it more deeply than George. He had never known a world without Fred. From the cradle to the classroom, from prank to profit, from the moment they learned to walk to the moment they soared from Hogwarts on broomsticks together, Fred had always been there. They weren't just brothers. They were a unit. A rhythm. A single heartbeat in two bodies. And now, one of those hearts was gone. For weeks after the battle, George barely spoke. He helped bury Fred in a small family plot behind the orchard at the Burrow. He sat through the funeral, unmoving as people came to pay respects. The eulogies blurred into one another. None of them could quite capture the noise Fred had brought into the world, or the silence he left behind. Weasley's wizard wheezes closed for a time. The storefront that had once pulsed with laughter and magical chaos stood shuttered, its windows dark. The prank shelves collected dust. The enchanted mannequin slumped motionless in mourning. Fred's corner of the workshop remained untouched. But time, though it never heals perfectly, nudges things forward. It was Ron who first convinced George to reopen the shop. He didn't say much. Just came by with a box of new joke prototypes and a quiet look that said, Fred wouldn't want it to end like this. And George, with trembling hands, opened the door. The laughter never returned in quite the same way. But in rebuilding the shop, George found a kind of therapy. He kept Fred's name on the sign. His jokes in the catalogue. His voice in the walls. Every invention that followed, every new product, every prank that lit up a child's face, was George's way of keeping his brother alive. Eventually, George married Angelina Johnson, a fellow Gryffindor and Quidditch player who had once dated Fred. Their bond grew from shared grief and mutual understanding. Together they had 2 children. One they named Fred. At family dinners, there was always an empty chair. Not physically, but spiritually. Fred's name came up in stories. His jokes were still told. His memory was as loud as his laugh once was. Even in death, Fred remained a part of them. His passing marked a turning point, not just for the family, but for the tone of their lives. The war had taken much, but it was Fred's death that reminded them what mattered most, the ordinary moments, the warmth of being together, the miracle of making someone laugh. Fred Weasley was more than a prankster. He was courage wrapped in comedy. A boy who made others feel brave just by smiling. A light that refused to go out, even when the darkness closed in. And though his life ended too soon, his impact was eternal. In the quiet years following the Second Wizarding War, the Weasleys did something harder than fighting, they lived. Out of grief, they built joy. Out of chaos, they raised children. The Burrow remained their anchor, but now it echoed with new voices, higher pitched, full of questions, laughter, and the mischief of a new generation. Each Weasley child carried with them not just the scars of what had been lost, but the strength of what had been survived. Bill and Fleur Weasley were the first to begin their family. From the calm seaside of Shell Cottage, they raised 3 children each. The Victory. With her mother's grace and part Vila charm, and her father's quiet strength, Victoire stood out wherever she went. She would grow into a poised, intelligent young woman, often seen on the Hogwarts Express beside Teddy Lupin, the son of Remus and Tonks. The two were frequently spotted together, their bond deeper than a crush, more enduring than friendship, though the whispers of romance never ceased. Bill and Fleur's younger children, Dominique and Louis, grew up between worlds. Bilingual, bicultural, and magically gifted, they balanced French elegance and British practicality. Dominique, bold and sharp-witted, was often compared to Ginny in temperament. Louis, more reserved, inherited his father's thoughtful nature and his mother's academic curiosity. Ron and Hermione Weasley, arguably the most public of the post-war couples, settled into lives that balanced the personal with the political. Hermione's work in magical law reform reshaped the ministry from within, while Ron continued to fight for fairness, first through a brief stint in the Auror office, then through his partnership with George at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. Their children were raised in a home filled with books, laughter, and more enchanted objects than ministry regulation would recommend. Rose Granger Weasley, their eldest, was brilliant from the start. Sharp-tongued and fiercely capable, she inherited her mother's intellect and her father's stubborn loyalty. Sorted into Gryffindor at Hogwarts, Rose quickly earned top marks and a reputation as someone who could out-debate any professor and out-duel any classmate, though she rarely needed to. Her younger brother, Hugo, was less academically inclined but equally quick-witted. Always tinkering, always curious, Hugo shared more in common with the twins of the previous generation, though perhaps with a bit more caution. Together, Rose and Hugo brought a balance of brains and heart to the next chapter of Weasley life. And then there were Harry and Ginny Potter, whose children carried not only the Weasley name through Ginny's bloodline, but the weight of the Potter legacy. Their eldest, James Sirius Potter, was every bit the troublemaker his name implied. With Fred and George's mischief in his DNA and Sirius Black's flair for rebellion, James was known for breaking rules, breaking records, and sometimes breaking into Filch's office without ever being caught. Despite the chaos, his heart was pure. He adored his siblings and took his role as eldest seriously, though he rarely admitted it. Albus Severus Potter, the middle child, was a quieter soul. Thoughtful, serious, and often wrestling with the expectations his name carried, Albus charted a more complicated path. Though his bond with Harry was sometimes strained by unspoken pressure, his connection with Ginny, and with his cousin Rose, gave him stability. He was a boy who sought truth over tradition and often found wisdom where others overlooked it. Lily Luna Potter, the youngest, was a whirlwind. Bright, bold, and imaginative, she reminded Molly of Ginny at that age, only louder, if possible. She was fiercely independent, loyal to her cousins, and showed early promise in both magic and mischief. With Luna Lovegood as her godmother, Lily had no shortage of stories about Nargles and the hidden properties of dirigible plums. Together, the children of the Weasley line filled the pages of a new generation, one not defined by war, but by the magic of ordinary life, school letters, Quidditch tryouts, Hogsmeade visits, and holidays at the Burrow. At Christmas, the old house creaked with life. Arthur's enchanted decorations danced through the rafters. Molly served mountains of food, doling out seconds before firsts were finished. The children tore through enchanted crackers and swapped tales of Hogwarts, while their parents, now veterans of a quieter but equally demanding life, watched with laughter and love. The war had taken much from them. But it had also given something back, the chance to see a new world rise, shaped by the children they raised, protected, and loved. And in every red-haired laugh, every daring prank, every brilliant essay or stubborn argument, the legacy of the Weasleys lived on, woven into the very fabric of the magical world they helped save. When the final curse was cast and the castle lay in ruins, the wizarding world stood at a crossroads. Voldemort was gone, but the cost had been great. In homes across Britain, families mourned, rebuilt, and tried to make sense of what came next. The Weasleys, though forever marked by loss, chose to build forward, not with vengeance or bitterness, but with resolve. The Burrow remained the heart of it all. After the war, it became more than a home, it became a symbol. A place where courage had been taught in the kitchen, where resistance had been whispered over breakfast, and where laughter had survived even the darkest hours. The house saw repairs, yes, both magical and emotional, but it never lost its charm. Its walls still leaned slightly to one side. Its floors still creaked. And its hearth still glowed with a warmth unmatched by any enchanted fireplace. Arthur Weasley, though older and wearier, returned to the ministry with quiet determination. The fall of Voldemort had cleared out much of the corruption, and in the vacuum, Arthur's unwavering integrity found new recognition. Though never one to seek power, he was likely promoted, perhaps to head of department or even higher. He used his position to ensure that Muggle-born witches and wizards would never again be marginalized. He also continued his beloved tinkering, finally able to discuss Muggle technology at work without earning scorn. His passion projects, like his flying car and enchanted radio, became curiosities rather than liabilities. Younger ministry employees sought his advice. He remained, always, the man who believed in the small things, who found magic in rubber ducks and love in loyalty. Molly Weasley, still grieving but never defeated, returned to her post as the family's unshakable foundation. She continued to knit sweaters, now for grandchildren, and to make her legendary treacle tart. But beneath the softness was the same steel that had felled Bellatrix Lestrange. Molly never spoke much about that duel. But in the years that followed, her reputation shifted. No longer just a kindly mother with a wand, she became a symbol of quiet, protective strength. Her role in the war became a whispered legend, a reminder that love, when provoked, becomes the fiercest force in magic. In public, Molly remained warm, generous, and welcoming. But anyone who ever threatened her family again would be wise to remember what happened in the Great Hall that night. The younger Weasleys resumed life at varying speeds. Bill and Fleur remained at Shell Cottage, raising their children with the sea at their back and the weight of history behind them. Bill returned to Gringotts but chose fewer field assignments, focusing more on education and artifact preservation. Fleur, graceful and unwavering, became a voice for international unity between magical communities, especially between Britain and France. Charlie, ever the free spirit, returned to Romania. He declined more formal posts within the ministry or Hogwarts and instead dedicated himself to conservation work. Though he never married or settled, he stayed deeply connected to his family, returning for holidays, birthdays, and every major event at the Burrow. His letters home were still singed on the edges. Percy, chastened and changed by war, worked tirelessly to redeem himself. He re-entered the ministry with new purpose, aligning with Hermione and others in the reform of magical law. No longer obsessed with titles, Percy learned to listen more, to love more freely, and to laugh more often, especially when surrounded by nieces and nephews. He became the uncle who brought educational books to birthdays, and the brother who always arrived early to help Molly set the table. George, though carrying a wound that would never fully heal, poured his grief into legacy. Reopening Weasley's Wizard Wheezes was not just an act of defiance, it was survival. Ron joined him in the business, and together they rebuilt the shop into something Fred would have adored. Every new product bore Fred's touch. George's laugh returned, slowly, and though it never sounded quite the same, it was still his. The business thrived. So did George, eventually marrying Angelina, raising a son named Fred, and teaching him not just to joke, but to be brave. Ron and Hermione, each carrying their own battle scars, became a partnership rooted in equality. Hermione spearheaded magical rights reform, ensuring that house elves, Muggle-borns, and all magical creatures would never again suffer under prejudice. Ron supported her, challenged her, and stood proudly in her shadow when needed. They were a team in every sense of the word. Their home was filled with debates, laughter, and the comforting aroma of burnt toast. Harry and Ginny, though not Weasleys by name, were in every way part of the family's next chapter. Ginny's Quidditch career soared, then gracefully transitioned into journalism. Harry found peace in fatherhood and in quieter heroism, working to reform the Aura office from within. The Potters were frequent visitors to the Burrow. Harry never forgot the feeling of walking through its door for the first time, and he spent the rest of his life trying to create that same feeling for others. Through all of this, the Weasleys remained what they had always been, not perfect, not pristine, but profoundly human. They laughed again. They celebrated again. They gathered at the Burrow year after year, children running between the crooked walls, new stories being told beside the old. And when someone was missing, like Fred or the late Pruitt brothers, they were remembered, not with silence, but with stories and toasts, tears and laughter. They rebuilt more than a world. They rebuilt each other. In the world of pureblood wizarding families, lineage was often everything. Ancient names were polished like silver. Family trees were pruned with prejudice. And those who married muggleborns or fraternized with lesser blood were quietly, or loudly, cast out. The Weasleys did the opposite. Descended from an old and respected wizarding bloodline, distantly connected to the sacred 28, the Weasleys had every opportunity to embrace the elitism that shaped much of magical society. And yet, generation after generation, they rejected it. Not out of rebellion, but out of principle. Arthur and Molly Weasley raised their children to understand that the value of a person had nothing to do with the blood in their veins and everything to do with the choices they made. Where other families bragged about ancestry, the Weasleys prized kindness. Where others sought status, the Weasleys offered hospitality. While the Malfoys wielded power through fear and pedigree, the Weasleys wielded influence through loyalty and love. This earned them a title in certain circles, one meant as an insult, but worn like armor, blood traitors. To be called a blood traitor was to be accused of betraying one's pure magical heritage. But to the Weasleys, it meant something else entirely, that they had chosen humanity over hierarchy, principle over privilege. They did not betray their blood. They simply believed it wasn't what made them who they were. Each of their children would carry this belief into the world in their own way. Bill married Fleur Delica, a part Vila from France, defying whispers about bloodlines and cultural difference. Charlie worked with magical creatures across borders and species, valuing all forms of life. Percy, after his ideological misstep, returned to help reform the ministry to protect muggleborns and magical minorities. Fred and George built a business where everyone was welcome, regardless of blood, class, or background. Ginny joined a professional Quidditch team and later wrote passionately about equal representation in sports and magical institutions. Ron married Hermione Granger, a muggleborn witch, and never once hesitated to stand by her against those who saw her as less. Even Arthur's fascination with muggle artifacts, mocked by some in the ministry, was rooted in deep respect. He didn't just study muggles, he admired them. He believed in their creativity, their strength, and their right to share the world with witches and wizards as equals. This philosophy was never more evident than in how the Weasleys treated Harry Potter. When Harry first arrived at the Burrow, he was a boy with no family, no home, and a legacy built on loss. The Weasleys didn't care about his fame. They didn't care about the lightning scar or the whispers in Diagon Alley. They saw a child in need of love, and they gave it freely. No questions. No conditions. They gave him a family. That act, simple, unpretentious, profound, epitomized who they were. Not just good people, but people who believed in good itself. In a world that often confused ancestry with worth, the Weasleys served as a quiet rebellion. They showed that blood status did not define one's morals. That courage didn't always come with medals. That a hand-me-down wand could be wielded just as bravely as one passed down through dynasties. Their legacy is not just written in names or wars won. It is written in the way they lived. They were not wealthy. They were not perfect. But they were right about what matters, about who matters, and about the kind of world worth fighting for. And in that, the Weasleys redefined what it meant to be pure blood. Not as a badge of superiority, but as a promise to use their power for others, not against them. In a series filled with dark magic, ancient secrets, and the fight between good and evil, the most powerful force was not a spell or a prophecy, it was family. And no family embodied that more than the Weasleys. To the outside world, they were humble. Poor in gold, rich in laughter. A bit chaotic. A bit loud. a bit too generous for their own good. But to those who truly knew them, the Weasleys were something more profound. They were good. In a world divided by blood, by fear, by pride and power, the Weasleys lived differently. Their power didn't lie in lineage or legacy. It lay in their capacity for love. When Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the chosen one, the orphan, stepped into their lives, they didn't treat him like a savior. They treated him like a son, a brother, a friend. Mrs. Weasley knit him a Christmas jumper before she'd ever met him. Mr. Weasley asked him questions about Muggle plugs with the same enthusiasm others reserved for Quidditch finals. The twins gave him laughter. Ginny gave him her heart. And Ron gave him a place at his side that never wavered. The Burrow became the home Harry never had. And the Weasleys became the family he never dared to hope for. But their story didn't revolve around Harry. It included him, because that's what family does. It includes. It surrounds. It defends. The Weasleys didn't need to be powerful to be important. They were the proof that everyday magic, the kind that makes a house feel safe, that puts an extra slice of pie on your plate, that stands beside you even when the world falls apart, is the magic that matters most. They showed that heroism can look like setting the dinner table for 9. Or standing up to a brother when he's gone astray. Or choosing to fight even when you've already lost someone you love. They proved that bravery doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes, it wears a hand-knit sweater with your initial on it. In the end, the Weasleys did more than survive 2 wizarding wars. They preserved what was worth saving: joy, decency, family. They didn't just raise 7 children. They raised the moral compass of a generation. Long after the war was over, long after Hogwarts had been repaired and peace had returned to the wizarding world, the Weasleys remained. At the Burrow, Molly stirred soup for visiting grandchildren while enchanted knitting needles clicked beside her. Arthur still tinkered with Muggle batteries in the shed. Ron, Hermione, Harry, and Ginny met for dinner, voices rising in warm disagreement. George laughed again, though softer. And the new generation, Victoire, Rose, Albus, Lily, ran through the orchard, brooms trailing behind them like banners. In a world built on magic, the Weasleys reminded everyone of what was real. They weren't just a family. They were the ideal. The good wizarding family. The ones who didn't ask what blood you came from, only whether you wanted to stay for dinner. And the door, somehow, was always open. And so, we've come to the end of the Weasley family story. From the Burrow's leaning chimney, to the final battle beneath the broken towers of Hogwarts, you followed a family whose greatest magic wasn't cast from a wand, but born from loyalty, courage, and unconditional love. We met Arthur, tinkering with Muggle plugs while risking his life at the Ministry. Molly, a lioness in the kitchen and a warrior in the Great Hall. Bill, scarred but strong. Charlie, wild and free. Percy, lost and found again. Fred and George, laughter incarnate. Ron, the steady hand in a storm. Ginny, the spark that refused to dim. And through their children. Through Victoire, Rose, James, and Lily. Their legacy grows, bright, stubborn, alive. If you're still awake, and your mind is quietly wandering across the wizarding world, you might be asking yourself, what about the Malfoys? What happens when a pureblood family does choose status over integrity? Can redemption bloom where fear once ruled? If you're curious about the Malfoy legacy, and how it compares to everything you've just heard, click the button on the top right corner of your screen. It will take you directly to our companion episode, The Malfoy Family Legacy, From Power to Redemption. But if your eyes are heavy, and your dreams have already taken root, don't worry. The story is done, but the magic isn't. If you are still awake and love these videos, hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the summer. Nature sounds will continue playing for a little while longer. To carry you deeper into rest, where the Weasleys live on, by candlelight, beneath the orchard trees, in a house held together by love. Good night, dear listener. And thank you for spending this evening at the Burrow.